So now that we're comfortable with this concept of 3D space in general, and we've been able to manipulate something in 3D space very simply, very effectively though, right? So sometimes the minimal approach is really the best approach when it comes to sometimes less can be more, right? So we're used to this, and we can do this in a tasteful manner, right? So something that we are going to get into now is using cameras. So this is where you control the point of view in 3D space. And once you've worked with 3D space a little bit and you've managed to manipulate a couple of things in 3D space, you can get a lot more control points by manipulating the point of view, and you can create that much more of a dramatic effect in your footage by adding a 3D camera in. So let's go ahead and let's just jump right in and go ahead and now in our composition, which we remember this from before where we were manipulating 3D space, we're going to go ahead and we're going to add a new camera. And interestingly enough, it gives us a couple of options. I really like this preset here that lets you pick the size of the lens, right? So we've got, or the focal length rather of the lens, right? So it defaults to a 24 millimeter, but you can make it like an 18 millimeter for a really exaggerated effect, or you can make it as much as a 200 millimeter if you want. But really, I like these presets because they figure out the film size and this here, the focal length, the angle of view, all that stuff. It calculates all that stuff for you in a preset, so that's the nice part. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to create, we're going to make a one-node camera. You can make a two-node camera, which has a point of view or a target point, and it can get a little hairy, and it's a lot more things to manipulate and work with. But for the time being, let's go ahead and let's pull down a one-node camera. And we'll notice, it's messed up our composition, but let's not panic. Everything will be just fine with the camera. So we've got the camera in here, and it looks like, everything's looking a lot different now. So how do we diffuse this situation? So really what's going on here is that the camera is really reacting only to the 3D layers. You'll notice that our two-dimensional layers really are unchanged, and really this dramatic effect here that you have is really from the blending modes that we applied earlier. But you really can apply, you have these two-dimensional layers, and they're always going to be faithful. They're always going to stick to the camera as two-dimensional layers. But this three-dimensional layer that we've got up here that we created with the plane, well, it could be a little bit troublesome that if we introduce a camera after the fact that we've manipulated this and have worked with it. So why don't we go ahead and just reset that property there, and why don't we go ahead and reset the orientation. We can even zero it out, like take the 3D property off of it. So this is the interesting part of it now. So we've got a camera, and if we make it three-dimensional, now we'll notice that since we've oriented it to the center, we can add three-dimensional properties to all of these layers, and they all show up properly in front of the camera now. When we were dealing without a camera, then we were just really working around the particular point of view that it defaulted to. So now we've got a camera, and it's got its own place in space, and we've got all of these different things that we can manipulate that are either closer or further away from the camera. So we've turned on three-dimensional layer for all of these, the three-dimensional layer property for all of these, and now we can go ahead and, why don't we go ahead and just manipulate the plane, and then maybe we'll manipulate some of this stuff in regards to the camera. So the interesting part about it is that you can get different levels of depth just by moving things closer and further away. So I'm just going to go in here, and we should be pretty germane to manipulating this stuff in 3 dimensions now, right? So I'll bank it just a little bit. And really, well, we're going to do it this way, right? So I'm just going to do a little bit of manipulation here with some of these objects. I'm going to put them on different. The interesting part about this is that we're going to take baby steps with the camera like we have with some of the other things. We're just going to move it very subtly in space just to give these things with different depth. So this is going to be closer to the camera. These might be a little further away. It's going to actually create a very interesting parallaxing effect. And parallax is when things on multiple planes and multiple points of view, or things that are multiple depths and distances away from the camera, move in different patterns. So that's the effect that we're going to go for. Just basically, you see a lot of this done with photographs. People will cut up photographs and make them put them on different depths from the camera, and then move the camera ever so slightly just to give them this kind of viewmaster effect. So I'm going to go in here. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take some of these objects here and I'm going to manipulate them and move them in different, I'm going to move them back and forth and stuff, and then I'm going to come back after I've done that and we're going to take a look at what I've done, and we're going to see how that makes a difference here. So now I'm manipulating this stuff, and I'm even going to put the paper on its own depth here, right? So I can turn that into a 3 layer, and I'm going to push that backwards just a little bit so that it has its own effect. So I'm going to go ahead and get this straightened out, and then I'm going to come back and show you what we worked on. Okay, so thanks for being patient. I took a little bit of a break here, and I went and I properly set up these layers. You really didn't want to see me manipulate these each individually to get them just right. It would have been would have made for a fairly boring video. So what I did is I did go in and I did position these all on different planes. Now you can't see it right now because we're staring at our composition straight on, but some of this stuff may look a little different. And then this is the camera, right? So if we take the camera off, then we lose some of that 3D effect. But really, to get back to the point, all these different layers are three-dimensional, but they're on different visual planes. And we'll get to see here in just a minute how just tweaking and moving the camera very slightly gives us a very distinct effect. So here's another workflow tip that's really going to make a big difference for you is, especially when you start dealing in three-dimensional space, it's important sometimes to see what your scene looks like. So, and what it looks like from a different point of view. So I'm going to go, and let me do that again. I'm going to go down here to where the composition viewer is. I'm going to set up a new composition viewer. So what it does is it just makes a copy of this. Now it does lock it, so you can unlock it so that it moves to whatever timeline you're switching to. But the thing that I'm interested in doing here is I'm not interested in looking at from the active camera. I'm interested in looking at from a custom view. And now if I pull down custom view, what it allows me to do is it allows me to see it from a different angle. So this is, I'm still retaining my camera over here, but I can look at a custom view from here. So something that you should familiarize yourself with now is the unified camera tool. So this is a little bit of a hard concept to grasp. I can click down here. I can also do orbit, track, and track Z. I can do those individually, but for the most part, the unified camera tool has all of those functions and works pretty well. So over here, I can take this unified camera tool and I can actually look at the scene as a whole. So say that you know, we're working, this is similar to maybe how you would work in Maya, right? So you'd have a camera set up over here, that would be your point of view, but you'd also have kind of like your, you know, your staged view, the view that shows you kind of what's really going on behind the curtain. So with the unified camera tool, I can see where I've put the depth on certain of these you know, of these certain things. So we can see that we can have parallax between this plane, this cityscape, and these mountains pretty easily, and then we've got the paper kind of in the background. So just a slight bit of camera movement is going to give us a lot of parallax between these items and make them fairly, you know, a little bit, you know, fairly fun, a little dramatic. So let's go ahead and do something like that very subtly with the camera. Also, something that you'll notice is that when I select the camera, you'll see that it's got what's called a frustum. The frustum is, this is inside of this cone is basically everything that it can see, or everything that it can project forward to. So sometimes it's helpful to see what the frustum looks like in this view here, and that's really the cone of view. Really, that's its fancy word for a cone of view. So it's very important though when you're moving these layers back and forth, right? So I can get in here and I can even manipulate these layers if I feel so inclined. Notice how it updates over here. I can go and manipulate these. The thing about parallaxing, one of the tricks to doing parallax properly is when you want something to retain a certain size but sit on a different depth plane, you do have to manipulate its scale property, right? So I can make this larger or smaller. If I make it larger and push it back, it's going to have a different effect. It's going to appear about the same size, and I can put it, you know, I can put it further back. But it's ultimately I'm going to want to scale it properly so that it looks good in this two-dimensional visual plane. The ultimate thing that you want is for this two-dimensional plane to really look the best, because that's really, at the end of the day, that's really the thing that your viewer's really going to be looking at. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to undo some of that, but that was just to demonstrate the relationship between scale and the distance from the camera. So just keep that in mind and take a look at that. I've done enough in here so I can see where everything lies on that layer, and you know, in that layered view, and you get the idea of what I've done since the last time we talked. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out. I'm going to close this view since I don't necessarily need it anymore, and I'm going to start working with the camera now. So now that we've looked under the hood and we've seen how things work with this, we can start just manipulating the camera in very subtle fashions to give this a lot more depth. So we know that this whole thing is parallaxed, and now I can take the camera and I can manipulate the camera's properties just like any other object. So let's say that this is the final position I want to be on, maybe is at 2 seconds, and this is the final view that I want in my build. So I'm going to, like always, animate backwards, and I'm going to select the position, and I'm going to select my orientation, and at the moment I'm just going to very subtly, one thing that might be kind of fun is if the camera kind of panned from the top, right? So let's go ahead and try that. Whoops. So I've set the keyframes for that to stand there, and then at the beginning I'm going to go up to the beginning, and I'm going to maybe I'll kind of bring it into the full picture, right? So very simply, very easily, I've manipulated the property down here, the position property of the camera, and I've created something fun there. So you get a little bit of depth from that. So let's preview that and see what that looks like. Alright, so see, this is what that looks like. Pretty simple, pretty fun. The multiple layers of depth we can see make it visually interesting. You know, some people can't really put their finger on why they think it's interesting, but that's really the secret, is that it's providing multiple layers of depth, right? So another way we could do this is maybe we can manipulate the position to zoom out a little bit, right? Like maybe we zoom in on the landing gear or something, right? So we do something like this. Maybe we even go past the plane a little bit, right? And we're completely up here in the paper, right? So this is another way to do it, right? So we scrub that. That looks pretty fun. Let's go ahead and preview that and see what we get there. So it's gonna queue that up for us. And fun. Look at that. Yeah. So we get some fun stuff there. So really, just the wages get really and I'm really only doing very subtle things. I'm not doing really dramatic things where I'm moving around and I'm bouncing around and looking at things from multiple points of view. People do employ those kind of techniques, and they look really good. But you have to start with baby steps when you're working with cameras. So now that we've taken some baby steps, let's go ahead and get maybe just a little bit more ambitious here and figure out ways that we can do a more tactile manipulation of the camera, right? So so far we've been manipulating it down here, moving it in and out, up and down, using these controls, which could be a little bit frustrating. It's not really getting us the results we want as quickly as we want. So why don't we go ahead, and I'm going to drag this back to the beginning. So what is our new starting place going to be? Let's go ahead and try something new. Let's go ahead and try our unified camera tool, which we shouldn't be strangers to at this point. But the unified camera tool, just to break it down a little bit, the unified camera tool allows you to track in on the z-axis. So this would be dollying, right, in camera parlance. So if I right-click and drag, that allows me to dolly the camera in and out. Using the middle mouse button allows me to move up and down. This would be tracking X and Y, which would be panning, right, with a real camera. And then this here allows me the left mouse button clicking allows me to actually rotate. So something to consider. And you'll notice that if you look down here, the orientation values are changing, and the position values change based on what I'm doing, right? So I can move the camera in really from anywhere, right? And now that I've had it keyframed, it can, it logs those as keyframes now that I've positioned and I've moved the camera. So that's something that maybe we want to undo that, just a little tiny bit. Let's figure out something that is going to be, a little bit funner, right? So I'm going to zoom in. Let's try zooming in on this, and as we come down from the top, maybe we want to just rotate ever so slightly. And you want to be careful because see, as I rotate, I start losing the visual on some of this, on some of the aspects of my animation. So we want to be ever so careful about this to make sure that we're not, we're not moving things in and out of the view that we don't want to be there. So maybe we start off here with the landing gear, and then we rotate down just a little tiny bit. And you'll notice it's just a little bit of rotation, and you have to be careful with this tool because it's on a hair trigger. So it takes a little bit of, a little bit of hands-on experience to kind of get good at using it. You've noticed that with a little bit of just a tiny bit of rotation, we're starting to add even more visual interest. It's starting to show us how all these 3D layers come together with perspective, right? So that's something that's something else that you can work with. Once you're feeling a little more comfortable, you can start working on maybe orienting or rotating the view a little bit more here. So that's just some really nice subtle ways that you can work with this without getting yourself too much in a bind with all of the different viewpoints and rotations and things like that. So always start out subtle and always start out rather modest and work your way from there, and you should end up with some fairly good compositions.